Please be seated. So they held everything in common, and no one claimed private ownership of anything. Did you hear what Tom was just reading a few minutes ago? So I have a new plan. We're going to open a joint bank account. And all of us will put all our paychecks in it, right? Can you imagine if that was how we still behaved? Although I think the downside of this plan is written right into that scripture, right? Because they laid everything at the apostles' feet, and then they distribute it to who needs it, which I'm sure worked great at the time of this writing, and maybe for a long time after that. But at some point, an apostle came along who thought, you know who needs this money? I do, right? I'm just guessing. And then we're back at the place where a few people have a lot of money and a lot of people don't have very much money, which is the problem they were probably trying to address in the first place. I think that when we read this gospel of John that we typically read on the Sunday after Easter, that we're so concerned about Thomas and his inability to believe without seeing Jesus in the flesh, that we skip over the whole part of what Jesus said to the disciples before all that, right? What he said to us, really. What he maybe even said to Thomas. He said, peace be with you. Now we say that all the time, right? We say that, we will in a few minutes. But do you ever think about what that means? To try to be a bearer of peace? To pray that somebody else will have peace? To try to have peace yourself? And then he goes on, right? That doesn't even the start. That's just the start of it. He says, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. No, thank you. I know where that story ended. And then he says, if you forgive the sins of anyone, they are forgiven. And if you retain the sins of anyone, they are retained. It's a lot of power, right? To think that we can forgive people. We have that power. Or we can hold on to it and keep it and keep our resentment and our anger. See what it does to us. And I'm not suggesting, of course, that we all open a joint bank account, because I don't really think that's a good idea. I can see the many ways that's not going to work. But I hope that as you hear these scriptures today, that you realize what a wild and radical thing we were called into as a church. See, church was created after Jesus' resurrection, right? The baptism was great, him coming to live among us, God in the flesh, wonderful, all great, good teachings, liked it. But after the resurrection, everything changed. After the resurrection, we wanted to change who we were and how we lived. We wanted to walk in the light, right, as the scripture says, and be in fellowship with God and with one another. We wanted to be a community of peace and forgiveness, where all people had unity with each other. And I know that sounds like a tall order, right? I mean, even the writer of the first letter of John says that. It's like, well, I hope you don't sin, but you're gonna. If you say you're not sinning, you're lying. Let's be real, right? We know what we're up against as human beings and how tall of an order Jesus put upon us when he said, you have this power, you have this peace, you have this mission. You can show the world the love of God that you have experienced through me. That's what God called us to do. And that's why the church was created. And I think we might be doing it. I mean, not all the time, okay? And not perfectly. But for those of you who were here last Sunday, and I like to talk about Easter Sunday and the Sunday after, because most people aren't here, but I have to tell you that I am always so filled with joy on Easter Sunday, and not just because it's so fun to see the kids hunting for Easter eggs, and because the gospel story of Jesus rising from the grave is so meaningful and powerful, but because I see this congregation at its best. I mean, we don't have a joint bank account, but we can do one heck of a potluck, y'all, right? Did you see that? Last Sunday, I don't even know where that food came from. There was so much food, right? Everybody brought what they could and shared it with everybody who needed it. Everybody held all that in common. And people helped wash the dishes and helped set the table and helped make more food, make sure the empty plates got replaced with full plates, the trays, casserole after casserole, right? And all the people who helped make Holy Week happen, the acolytes and the ushers and the choirs, beautiful music. So many wonderful gifts. I'm always reminded on Easter of all the people who work so hard in a way that's often unseen to just take care of little things so that all of us can have a better experience of God and of this community than we might otherwise have had. And I know that in many ways St. Stephen's is a church, right? Like any other church. Much of what we're called to do, growing people on their spiritual journeys and building community and sharing our gifts, is just what church is supposed to be, right? I mean, that's from the first, that's what they were trying to do. Maybe that we've changed our methods a little bit, but the idea of continuing in the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and of the prayers, right? That's our first promise at baptism, because that's what we do as a church. And yes, our church is a little bit different, I think, because we're trying to do that for everyone, right? All people, no exceptions. Wherever you are in your spiritual journey, wherever you come from, we're trying to build a community where all people feel welcomed, and we truly are unified, even across whatever diversity we may experience or imagine or be told exists. But I think that what really has attracted my attention after our year of discernment is the last little bit that we discerned of what we were called to do, which was to be a healing presence for the community. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean we do healing prayers and we have healing rituals? Does that mean that we are people of service, making sure that people have food and housing and the things that they need in our community? Well, it's probably all those things and something more. Because when I talk to people, this community has been healing and transformative for many of them by being a place where they can grow in their journey and have a community and use their gifts. They may seem like simple things, but they have a profound impact on people, and they're part of what helps us to be a healing presence. It's really too bad that Jesus didn't come to his first disciples that very Easter day, if you noticed, and say, stay in this locked room and be nice to each other. Because if that was the mission of the church, we'd be set, right? We know how to love each other. We know how to show love to the people who show up here. And frankly, I would say we know how to show love beyond these walls. There are so many people who have such a heart for service in our congregation. But I wonder if there aren't some people in the world who long for a place like St. Stephen's but don't know that it exists, right? Who want to have a place where they can connect to the divine, to the sacred, to something beyond themselves, a place where they can use their gifts in service of the community, a place where they can feel loved and accepted, and they don't know we're here. And I know, we're Episcopalians, we do not do evangelism. We not go door to door and talk to strangers about our faith. I get it. I'm not asking you to do that. Frankly, I know it's hard enough to talk about your faith to people you love and care about, because the truth is, the public face of Christianity, let's just say, leaves something to be desired, right? So it's hard to explain to people, yes, I go to church, but it's a different kind of church than you might think it is. I get all of that. But I also wonder, what can we be doing as people in our own lives and as a community to make sure that this is not, as one person recently told me, a best-kept secret, right? But in fact, a place where we truly can welcome the people who long for this. When Jesus visits Thomas, finally, he says to him, after he allows him to touch his hands and feet, give him the very thing that he had asked for, he says, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now, that might just be like a blow to Thomas, right? Like, you should have believed, right? You shouldn't be having to see this. But I don't think so, because that's not how I read Jesus, right? He showed up, he met him where he was, and that's not how we are either, right? We welcome doubt, we welcome questions. That's part of our faith journey. I think that maybe Jesus was talking about us, right? Because I don't know about you, but I have not had the experience of actually putting my hands in the wounds on Jesus' side. Maybe you have, and that's great. But for many of you, your faith came from something else. And I have to tell you, in the world that we live in, where Christianity seems like something very different from what we're trying to do here, and it no longer has a dominant place in our culture, but is something that only a few people are still trying to do, I do think it's a blessing that anyone ever believes. I really do. I think it's a miracle that anyone ever comes to church, not just on the Sunday after Easter, but ever. I think it's a great gift and a blessing that all of us, in some way or another, have had some experience, some kind of context that has led us to be people of faith. And I know how you could read what I'm saying to be like, well, if God can make people believe, then why isn't God making more people come to our church? Okay, fine. Maybe God needs a little help. But God is doing a pretty good job. And that's not what I'm trying to tell you, that it's God's fault that anybody is or isn't at church. What I'm trying to tell you is that your faith is a blessing, right? However it came to you, however you live it, however you experience it. And we know that we live in a world where there's this great need for healing. And how we offer that healing to the world maybe isn't sharing the stories of what gives us hope or gives us faith or lets us forgive people. Or maybe it's in being people who offer hope and joy and forgiveness and peace. And maybe somebody comes to you and says, hey, I've noticed that you can forgive people and that you have a sense of peace. How did that happen? There's an opening, a wide door. You could explain to them what gives you the gifts that you have. But really, however you are called to live, I want you to remember that your faith is a gift. And that in the wake of Christ's resurrection, we are called to be a different kind of community, to continue to be a different kind of community that makes a place for all people and that shows the love of God to all those in need, that offers peace and forgiveness and is sent into the world just as Jesus was sent by God. How you do that is up to you.